Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul Kirtley. In this episode we're going to talk about top trees for bushcraft, the best time for carving, cleaning your pots in random places, how not to get wet under a tarp again, and light saw recommendations and knife and axe maintenance at home. Welcome to episode 35 of Ask Paul Kirtley. I'm back in the northeast of England at the moment, and you might remember back about 6 months ago, actually longer ago, back in December, January. I can't remember the exact episode number, I should remember, but I recorded an episode in the snow back in an area of the northeast that I used to go as a young boy and get to know the woods and start to be on my journey in terms of learning about nature. I'm back in that spot today, out for a hike today in the northeast. It's getting on towards the end of the afternoon. It's been a nice sunny day, but it's coming in quite cloudy now, so I'm hoping I can get this recorded before we get any rain. I get the feeling it's feeling very humid today. It's overcast now. I'm feeling like we're about to get some rain, but it's really nice to be in here. It's very overgrown at the moment. It's and you know, getting towards the end of the summer, some things are starting to wilt, the fruits are starting to get quite plump, things are starting to ripen, the nuts are starting to be fully formed. So yeah, it's starting to feel a little bit back-endish, like we're moving towards autumn, but it's still green and lush and very full of life and really nice to be out. And I don't know whether the microphone's picking it up, but there's loads of hoverflies up in this sycamore tree above me, just flying around and buzzing each other. And so if you can hear a buzz in the background, that's what it is. It's these hoverflies up here. Okay, right, I'm on my really small pocket camera today, and there may be some jumps and bumps because it only records for about 15 minutes before stopping, so I may have to stop and start and restart. So if it seems a bit jumpy and cutty today, that's why, but I'll do my best to try and keep that smooth and not cut off the end of any answers, importantly, if the camera stops. So I'll keep an eye on the camera, making sure it's still recording. All right, top trees for bushcraft. This is a question from Tony Hunter, and he said, I've seen all the Ask Paul Kirtley videos so far and been thinking of a question I would like to ask. I've been interested in bushcraft for just over a year and was wondering, what is your list of top trees for learning the ID of for uses in bushcraft, i.e. firewood, fire lighting, bark for tinder bundles, campcraft, pot hangers, raised beds, etc. Thanks, and great videos, keep them coming, Tony. Well, Tony, there's many useful trees. You asked about trees particularly. There's many useful trees and plants all around us. Some are quite specific to particular environments, some are quite specific to certain geographic regions, some are much more widespread, and certainly even if a specific species might be particular to an area, there are very similar species to that in other areas as well. So for me, if you want the best bang for your buck in terms of learning some trees to start off with, you want ones that are common, ones that are widespread, and ones that are also useful, clearly. And you mentioned some really good uses there in terms of fire lighting, campcraft, etc., covering your basic needs, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing to be able to do. So for me, I would say birch. So birches in general, in this area, it's going to be silver birch. There is some downy birch, but they look very similar. But silver birch, whether it's small twigs for fire lighting, whether it's bark for fire lighting, whether it's roots for binding, saponins, natural soap in the leaves, sap in the spring, lots and lots of uses. And then there's fungi that are related to birch as well, or at least have a symbiotic relationship with birch or are associated with birch. So things like birch polypore, very useful for everything from stropping your knife, it's the classic razor strop fungus, through to making medicinal teas from the young ones. In the north, not just the north of England and into Scotland, but also the north of Eurasia and the north of North America, associated with birch is the horse's hoof fungus, one of the best tinder fungi. You've also got the likes of the birch boletes, very good eating, birch boletus, and there are several different ones. So there's a lot of useful elements of that tree in and of itself, and as well as some of the other associated fungi. So silver birch and downy birch in Northern Europe, and then as you go to North America there are similar birches, so canoe birch for example. There are Himalayan birches over in Eurasia, but they all look very, very similar and they all have very, very similar uses. So if you get to know the birches, they're one of the very most useful to know, even though a lot of people consider them weeds. Pines again, so here Scots pine, very, very useful in Northern Europe. So we're kind of like the westernmost bastion of Scots pine. It's really a boreal forest tree, and in the north of the UK, so in Scotland, is the sort of westernmost natural habitat for Scots pine. It's been planted and introduced throughout the UK, but as you go east from here through Scandinavia into Russia, across right away, all the way pretty much to the eastern side of Russia, you're going to find Scots pine right through that belt. So learn Scots pine. When you jump across to the North America, jack pine is again one that takes a similar ecological niche. And so if you can learn to identify pines and differentiate them from spruces, certainly you want to be able to differentiate them from yew, which is a needle tree which is poisonous, Taxus baccata, that has single needles coming from the stem. It has greeny yellow stomata on the underside, and the needles are arranged spirally, but they arrange themselves, so they emanate spirally, but they arrange themselves in pretty much a plane. The bark is very distinct. Get an identification guide, make sure you understand how to identify yew and separate that out from the other needled species, because it is highly toxic. Once you recognize yew, then you can start to use some of the other needled species such as pines and spruces and hemlocks and firs and larches. You can start to use them for various things, and for me, top of the list would be the pines, and with one exception, all the pines have needles that emanate in pairs. So that's a key identification feature, and it's a key differentiation feature between it and other things such as yew and other single needled trees. So as long as you've got needles that emanate in a pair, a little bit like two hairs coming out of the same follicle, they're together in something called a fascicle. In this country, in the UK, it's most likely to be Scots pine if it's a native species, but then there are lots of introduced pine species as well. But you can make pine needle tea, which is rich in vitamin C, so you want to be able to differentiate it from yew for those reasons. So that's a key thing to learn. If you want to use it for pine needle tea or any of the other pines for pine needle tea, make sure you can eliminate Taxus baccata, so that you can then say, right, this is one that's not going to poison me. Once you can do that, you can use it for pine needle tea, but there are many other uses as well. Starting at the bottom, roots for bindings. The bark's been used for food in the past as well. The inner bark, the inner cambium, has been dried and used for a flour substitute. You can use the sap, particularly when it's dried. The resin is very good for lighting fires. The wood itself splits very well. You can make very good feather sticks from it. There's lots and lots of basic uses, and then you can go into more complicated uses again in terms of extracting various elements from different species of pine trees, turpentine, all sorts of things. But in terms of your basic uses in the forest, roots for bindings, resin, needles for vitamin C source. The pollen is edible. There's lots and lots of uses. So get to know the pines, be able to differentiate certainly between pines and yews, and then maybe start to learn some of the spruces. Again, Northern Europe, it's going to be Norway spruce mainly that is the most native one, certainly in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, into Finland, into Russia, you're going to see Norway spruce a lot. You'll see it in the UK a lot planted, but you're also going to see things like Sitka spruces as well. So single needles, but on little woody pegs. Tend to be four-sided. Sitka spruce is very spiky on the end. Norway spruce, less so. Spruce boughs in general are good for things like shelter building, bedding, when you're making shelters. Make sure you don't get Sitka spruce though, because as I say, it's very spiky on the end. You want your Norway spruce. You can make a tea from the needles, but better is the pine needle tea. So I would say go for pine needles first. And of course as well, if you're making a tea from spruce needles, definitely make sure it's spruce, because they're single needles emanating from a twig, as are yew. There are some clear differences if you know the two, but make sure you know the differences. So spruce, willows in general are very, very useful as well. They tend to live near or actually in water or very damp ground, so therefore they are a good indicator of water. We need water, so if you can spot willows in an environment, even if there's no surface water, you can find water. So that's one really good use. Also, they tend to be pretty good for friction firelighting, as long as that you've got a dead dry standing piece. So friction firelighting, you can make withies with the shoots, you can make baskets, you can make fish traps, you can use the bark for cordage. Lots and lots of great uses of willow. The bark contains salicylic acid, which is a natural form of aspirin when it gets into your system. So there are some medicinal uses there as well. So willows, I would say. Alders as well. There are alders down here. I'm down by a stream at the moment. Again, they like to be near water, have their toes in the water, as it were. And again, good indicator of water, damp ground. They also have nitrogen fixing roots, so you tend to get various species growing near them, things like red currants, nettles. They tend to grow around alders, so if you can identify alders from a distance, you can also start to identify other resources. But in and of itself, probably the most directly useful one for you, again, friction firelighting, dead standing piece of alder, pretty good for friction firelighting. Hazel, I'm just thinking there's hazel over there. Hazel's good for all the I'm just looking at your questions. All the campcraft stuff, things like pegs, pot hangers, those type of things that you need a reasonable amount of strength with not a huge amount of mass. Those are well made out of hazel. You can make very good withies from hazel as well. So all of your campcraft, whether it's constructing camp, whether it's constructing washstands, whether it's constructing sawhorses, those lashings made from withies are very strong. And then in terms of making pegs, pot hangers, poles, all those sorts of things, hazel's very good. Splitting it down for spatchcocking a chicken or panassing a salmon over the fire, all very, very well made from hazel, and it's non-toxic as well, of course, for food use, as are all of the ones that I've mentioned, pines, spruces, willows, alders, hazel. The maples are good as well. I'm sat under a sycamore here, one of the maple family. It is good for carving. It's good for, it makes very good utensils. They're light and they're strong. Dead standing is good for friction firelighting again. You can tap it for sap, but you're not going to be able to make maple syrup from sycamore or many of the maples. You need specific sugar maples and red maples from North America. Yeah, I would say they're the main uses for you. Again, directly in terms of your questions, just looking at the sycamore here, friction firelighting, carving, they're the main things. And a lot of people again consider sycamore a weed. It's not a native species in the UK, but it is it is very well established and it's been here hundreds of years, so you'll find it a lot, but people tend to cut it down. So if you want to practice carving, it's often a good one that you can get hold of quite easily. And then I think other ones that you should know how to identify beech and oak, because some of the best firewood, if you can get dead beech or dead oak, get really good embers from it in terms of roasting things. So I talked about panassing salmon over the fire, I talked about spatch cooking chickens over the fire. When you're roasting things over the meat, clearly over the fire, such as meat or fish, you want something that's going to be non-toxic, clearly for starters, but you want something that's going to give a good steady heat. So you'll start a fire, you'll build it up, you'll get some of that beech or oak on there, dead dry standing stuff, dead branches that have fallen typically. Collect those, saw them up, split them down if you need to, not too much though. Don't want them too small because they'll just burn away to nothing, but if they're really big you might need to split them down, sort of wrist thickness sort of size pieces. Get those on, let them catch a light, burn down to some good coals, some good embers. Then you get that sort of barbecue heat, spread the coals and get some stuff cooking over. Absolutely fantastic. So certainly learn how to identify those. Far too many people try and cook things over the fire with the wrong type of firewood. What you need is something that is going to give you good embers. For boiling you need flames, so you need small sticks, things like birch, things like spruce, things like pine, small thin sticks, pencil thickness, finger thickness. It's going to give you a lot of flame quite quickly. You're going to boil. Simmering, maybe slightly bigger things, and it could be those species. But when it comes to roasting, you really want those dense hardwoods, things like beech and oak. They're the best ones to find, but then things like willow, as long as you keep it in the round, will work well. I've already talked about willow. Again, it has to be dead, dry, standing. Many people try and cook or even just have fires with wet firewood they found on the ground, with stuff that's standing that's not properly dead. It's full of water, it won't work properly, particularly not for cooking, particularly not for roasting. So learn to identify not just the species, but also the condition that you need the firewood to be in. That's a key thing for anybody that wants to do a lot of campfire cooking. Hornbeam as well works well for cooking, very calorific firewood, but you're not going to find that so much around the UK, only in specific enclaves. So those that I've given you for fire lighting, for tinder bundles, for campcraft, pot hangers, beds, etc., they'll serve you well, and they're common and they're widespread and they're very useful. And the species that you'll learn close to home are similar to species that you'll see further afield. So in terms of the pines, the spruces, the birches, the willows, the alders, all of those you will find very similar species right around the Northern Hemisphere. So learn those first and then you can build out from there. That would be my advice. Quite a long answer, but good to get some questions that aren't about kit. Thank you. All right, next one. Dish cleaning in random spots, and this is from Mike Mayo, and he asks, how do you clean up your dirty dishes when you backpack into a random spot with no running water close by on a trip lasting more than one night? Do you bring water or multiple sets of cookware? Is there a product available to make cleanup easier or possible without water? Thanks, Paul, keep up the good work. All the best from across the pond, Mike. Well, Mike, I don't know where across the pond you are, whether you are, can't tell even from your email address, whether you're in the United States or whether you are in Canada. Clearly, some of the more arid parts of the United States, particularly, you're going to struggle for water. So that might be what's driving your question, or maybe some of the higher altitude spots you might hike into when there isn't any snow melt. You might struggle to find water there, similarly as you do in parts of Europe in the summer. So I don't know quite what's driving your question, but one thing I would pick up on, you said backpack into a random spot. I rarely backpack randomly. You have to plan your route clearly, and one of the things you want to be doing when you're planning a route, and I don't mean to be patronizing here, but it's just one of the things you do want to be doing, this is general advice, is be thinking about where you're going to get water from, thinking about how much water you're going to have to carry. Now, if water's scarce, I don't really want to be carrying water for anything other than drinking. So I certainly won't be carrying water for washing up. But where you choose to camp then has to be predicated on what you need to be able to do there, and you need enough water to drink first off, and you need enough water in the evening, you need enough water in the morning, and you may well need enough water for a bit of a wash. You may need water for washing up. You don't necessarily need to have a wash every day, but you certainly need to be drinking every day, particularly if it's a dry area. If it's quite arid, you need to be drinking plenty. So where you're going to get your water from is a key consideration, and that might determine where you're going to camp, because camping in spots where there is no water becomes difficult. And I've camped even in the UK in relatively wet areas. You can be camping high up in the mountains and there is no direct source of water there, so you've only got to use what you've got with you, and that starts becoming quite difficult until maybe then you drop down the next day, you stop, you have a good drink of water when you're there, you fill up your water bottles and you carry on. But I tend to like to try and camp near to where there is a source of water, rather than just randomly stop and then go, oh, where's the water? And that is that. Look at a map, and even if look at where there might be water coming down, streams. Look at where there might be water pooling. Try and then plan your route around places that are more likely to have water. That would be the first thing that I would be doing, and that's a general piece of advice because I don't know the specifics of where you have in mind. But in terms of cleaning dishes, if that's going to be a problem in terms of sourcing enough water, then maybe you need to alter what you're doing with your food. So maybe you need to get some dehydrated food and then just add water to the packet and eat straight out the packet. Then you don't have any washing up to do. You roll the packet up, you carry a trash bag with you, and I would recommend carrying a fairly heavy duty trash bag, because the corners of those foil packets on the dehydrated food can be quite sharp once you've ripped them. That can put a hole in a lightweight trash bag. So take like a rubble sack, like a heavier duty trash bag, put your trash in, pack it out. And similarly, if you have anything with sharp corners that like tins, or even parts of tins that you've ripped off, or parts of packets that you've ripped off, if they're sharp, they will cut a thin plastic bag. So you don't want bits of waste food seeping into the rest of your gear. So that might be the solution. Or you may need to just have something that you eat out of the pot. So rather than cooking in the pot and then putting it on a plate and getting everything dirty, just try and minimize the amount of washing up there is to do in the first place. Preference would be, if water's at a real premium, preference would be boil some water, put it into a bag, let that soak into the food, dehydrated food, eat it out the bag, roll the bag up, put it in the trash. No washing up to do. The pot's not dirty because you've just boiled water. You've wasted no water other than water that you've consumed yourself. If it's really critical, that's what I would be doing. Second to that, I would be cooking and eating out of the same pot. I rarely carry a plate unless I'm doing a canoe trip where we're going to have a range of different foods, or if I'm in a static camp for a while, if I'm teaching a course, I will just take a mug with me. I will eat cereal out of that in the mornings. I can boil eggs in that. If it's a metal mug, I can boil eggs in it if I want those for breakfast at the beginning of a trip. I can drink tea, I can drink coffee, I can have soup, I can eat a meal out of it. All just out of one thing, and there's only ever one thing to wash up. And I may then take a cooking pot. Sometimes on some trips that's the same thing. I boil water in a 1 litre, it's like a 2-pint mug, and I can put that into dehydrated food. I can drink out of it. I can heat water up for any other reason, just one pot, and then if I don't cook anything in it, I've got no washing up to do. And the only thing I have to clean then is a spoon. So that would be my advice. Think about where you're going to camp, plan your route. You're going to need water anyway, but if it's a real premium, think about generating no washing up in the first place. That would be my advice. And if you are insisting on using pots and cleaning is an issue, the hardest thing to get off is grease. Grease is hard to get off, so minimize the amount of fatty foods, you know, like sauces that have got lots of oil in them, putting oil on things. Plastic plates in particular hold oil and grease a lot, so I tend to avoid those because they hold a lot of flavor. They're hard to clean in the bush. So if I'm going to take a plate, I'll take a metal plate. They're easier to clean, you can sterilize them more easily, and the MSR stainless steel plates are very good. I tend to take those on trips where I'm taking a plate. Otherwise I just take a mug, but if I really have to, just eat out the packet, and then there's no washing up. I know that was a bit repetitive, but I was just trying to think about generalizations because I don't know exactly the circumstances that you're talking about. All right, I think I'll get another one in before this camera stops again. Best time for carving, and this is from Harry the Hobbit. Hi Harry. Hello, what is the best time for carving, especially spoon carving? And do I need to use a special carving knife rather than the Mora to get good results? Cheers. I'm assuming you mean time of year, Harry, as opposed to time of day, but I'll answer both just in case. Time of day, do it when it's light. I've seen more accidents, or I've heard of more accidents when it's dark. It's harder to see what you're doing. Even if you're using a good modern head torch, it's harder to see what you're doing. The end of the day, it tends to be when you're tired as well. You've got less concentration. So avoid carving when it's dark, carve during the day. Time of year, if you're carving with green wood, it doesn't really matter that much, Harry. Spring can be a good time. There's lots of things to choose from. It can be nice to be out in the woods at that time of year. I don't tend to do so much outdoor carving in the winter just because your hands are cold. It's not so pleasant sitting around, even around the campfire. So I would say spring, summer, into the autumn, lots of easy to identify deciduous woods to choose. And again, in the summer, they're easier to identify than in the winter. It's nice to be out. I would say that's the time of year that would be best, and you've got long days to do your carving as well. Do you need a special carving knife? No, you don't. The Mora wood carving knives are nice. They are nice for carving, but a Mora clipper or a Mora strong, the strong version of the clipper, they're great for carving. They're great general purpose knives. You can do all of your basic campcraft. You can do carving with them. That's what we use on our courses. So elementary, essentials, I give those to people. They use them for all the tasks, whether it's making bow drill sets, making netting needles on our intermediate, or carving spoons on the elementary course. Pretty much anything that I ask anybody to do on any of the courses that involve small carving. Once you get onto the larger carving jobs, an axe is handy, but all of the small carving jobs, you don't need a specialist carving knife. It's nice to have. You can do some things more efficiently with them, but a general purpose Mora clipper will be absolutely fine. So I would just advise you to go out and start learning to carve. The only thing you are going to need if you're doing spoon carving or bowl carving or carving cups is you will need a specialist spoon knife, at least a small spoon knife, so that you can carve the bowls out of the spoons easily. You can start to carve larger implements out with those, so larger spoons, etc. But then you might also want to get a medium-sized spoon knife for some of the larger objects, just to get the right curves and to remove a reasonable amount of material in one spot. So it's up to you. Small spoon knife and your normal Mora, you'll be absolutely fine. Okay, hopefully that helps, Harry. Send me some photos of your carving once you get going with it. Okay, how not to get wet under a tarp. Those of you that follow my YouTube channel will probably smile at this question. To be fair to Jeff, this question came before I made that video, and that video about how to stay dry under a tarp wasn't made in reaction to this question from Jeff. I think this question from Jeff is a sensible question. The video on YouTube was made as a reaction to some dumb comments that I got about my lightening the load videos, where I was looking at lightweight tarps amongst other things, and also the video that was linked from that about how to set up the lightest of those setups. I got some fairly dumb comments like, that'll be all right until it rains. And yeah, okay, fair enough. Some people are skeptical about whether or not tarps will keep you dry in certain weather conditions. And I think we should address that, particularly in the context of Jeff's question here, which is a sensible one. And I'll link to those other videos in the show notes. So I'll link to the recent YouTube video about tarps keeping you dry, which I filmed in very heavy rain under my tarp. The lightening the load video about different tarps and sleeping setups to reduce the weight of packs, and the setup of the lightest one of those setups. I will link all of those in the show notes at paulkirtley.co.uk. Find episode 35 of Ask Paul Kirtley. Those links will be in the show notes there on my blog. So Jeff's question is, I noticed you like to sleep on the ground under a tarp without the benefit of a tent. How do you prevent rainfall from leaking under the tarp and getting your bedding wet? And that's a genuine concern. And actually, if you don't do it right, that may well happen. You may well get wet under a tarp if you don't do it right. And I think that's the key thing. You have to do things right. You can't just buy kit and expect it to do everything for you without engaging your brain. And again, this is not aimed at you, Jeff, just to be clear. It's just some of the comments that I've had on YouTube about tarps. Yeah, okay, if you put a tarp up high on the edge of a woodland with a prevailing wind coming from that side, yes, the rain is going to blow under the windward side of the tarp. Of course, that's just physics. But it's about being intelligent with where you put your tarp. So I have spent hundreds, probably into the thousands of nights out under a tarp. I live and work outdoors many months of the year, every single year, and I have done for a decade full-time, and before that part-time in terms of working. And I've hiked and camped since I was in my late teens, and I'm now 43. So I am talking from 25 years of experience of hiking, camping in the mountains, camping in the woods, camping in the UK, camping in Scandinavia, camping in mainland Europe, camping in Africa, camping in North America. Okay, I am talking from that perspective when I talk. I am not sitting here for the YouTube commenters. I am not sitting here speaking from the perspective of theory. Okay, I'm speaking from the perspective of experience. If you put a tarp up high on the edge of a piece of woodland when it's windy, yes, you will get water underneath it. If you are under a very small tarp and it rains very, very heavily, that water can bounce off the ground and splash under your tarp. Yes, those things can happen. But I'll give you a recent example, or an example from earlier this year. We were between courses that we ran, and actually one of those courses was the episode where we did the live Ask Paul Kirtley with a live audience asking the questions. That was the 2-day course that we did back in April, I believe it was, if I remember rightly, end of March, beginning of April. And between that course and another course, we had some really, really bad weather. And it was fairly unpleasant when we recorded that episode. You remember us talking about that, and if not, I'll link to it in the show notes. It was wet and it was windy, but it had been a lot wetter and a lot windier before that, and it was very wet and very windy after that course. We stayed in the woods after that course, and a storm came through, and it was horrendous. We had trees coming down in the woods. There were areas of the woods that were flooded, but I did not get wet under my tarp. And the reason I didn't get wet under my tarp was because I was intelligent about where I put it. Aside from making sure that I'm not under a tree that's liable to blow down or parts of it to blow off, that's the primary concern. You're then intelligent about where you put it. Where is the weather coming from? Make sure that you're not on the edge of the woods on the side where the weather's coming from, or even on the edge of a clearing in the woods in the direction that the weather's coming from. Get into the woods. On that course, the 2-day course, we didn't have the students put their tarps up where they normally put their tarps up on the 2-day course to camp, because of the way that the strong wind was coming into the edge of the woodland. We had them camp it was a very slight rise, just on the other side of this slight rise, maybe about 100 yards at most from where they normally camp. The difference in how windy it was between where we'd normally have students camp on that course and where we put them because of the prevailing wind that weekend made a huge difference to their comfort, both in terms of temperature and in terms of protection from the rain. So being intelligent about where you put it is the first thing. In terms of macro positioning, where is the weather coming from? Where is the best side of these woods? Where's the best side of this hill? Where am I going to get some shelter? Even one side of a tree stump or another will make a difference to how much wind and rain will get anywhere near you. The next thing you need to do, clearly if you put your tarp up and you're in a localized dip, what can happen is the rain comes down off your tarp, hits the ground and then flows underneath your tarp and you end up lying in a pool of water. You don't want to be doing that either, so look for local minima, look for local low spots and avoid sleeping in them, avoid spanning your tarp between them. That is the primary thing to do there. Think about where water is going to go when it flows off your tarp. Think about where water is going to go on the ground generally if it rains heavily. And as I say, I spend lots and lots, it varies, but I spend between scores and hundreds of nights out in a year under a tarp, depending on what I'm doing, what year it is. Some years I've spent more time out than others. Some years I've spent more time in tents. Some years I've spent more times on trips in tents and less time in tarps. It depends, but I've spent a lot of time out under tarps, and only on a handful of occasions have I had any water run under my tarp, because I always do my utmost to make sure I think about it and I position my tarp correctly. Don't need to spend a long time. This is not an involved process. Macro, where do I put it? Micro, where do I put it? And then put it up. Doesn't need to take a long time. A good tip from a friend of mine when you're looking for somewhere to put your tarp up is take your rucksack off. When you come to the general area you're going to put your tarp up, take your rucksack off, because if you're at the end of a long day's hike and you're tired, and this rings true, it's a piece of advice I heard him giving somebody recently, and it's not one that was at the forefront of my mind, but it is now. It's a good one. It's something I do, but it wasn't something that was sort of in my conscious mind as a piece of advice. Put your rucksack down and then walk around finding a good spot, because if you've got a big heavy load on that you've had on your back all day, the thing you want to do is put it down, and so you'll put it down, and if that means that's where you're going to put your camp up, it might not be optimal. So put your rucksack down, make sure you can remember where it is, of course, and then find that localized spot that you're going to put your camp, put your tarp up. It doesn't need to take a long time, 5 minutes at most to choose a good spot. All right, that's that thing. And then the third thing is then use a bivvy bag. Use a waterproof cover for your sleeping bag, and your sleeping mat goes inside that and your sleeping bag goes inside that. That gives multiple levels of protection for your sleeping gear. It means that it's not going to get wet, and we'll come back to that in a second. It means it gets dirty less quickly, which is important because dirty sleeping bags don't work as well in terms of keeping you warm. And it also gives another layer of protection in terms of thermal efficiency, stops drafts, just in the same way as you putting a waterproof jacket over you stops the wind getting into your thermal layers. Putting a waterproof cover over your sleeping bag stops the wind taking the warm air away from your sleeping bag. It also traps another layer of air between the sleeping bag and the bivvy bag, so it makes it more thermally efficient. It keeps it dry, it keeps it clean. In terms of keeping it dry, you can, if it's a really good bivy bag, it will stop the rain getting in. You can even have your feet sticking out the bottom of the tarp. If it's a small tarp, pop the bottom of the bivy bag out the bottom of the tarp a little bit. That means you can get your rucksack well in above you. That stops drafts coming down your neck. You can put your dry clothes on top of your sleeping bag, on top of your rucksack rather, above where you're sleeping. You're nicely cocooned in, you're nicely encapsulated in your sleeping bag, in your bivy bag. Everything's together as well. Remember I said put your sleeping mat inside as well. Then you're not going to slide off it. The exception to that, I would say now, is with the advent of those thick X-bed mats and similar, they can be quite hard to get inside a bivy bag and a sleeping bag. That's the flip side of those. That said, if I was doing a lightweight tarp trip, I wouldn't have one of those. I'd use those more for sleeping on rock on canoe trips, and I use them for winter trips sometimes when I'm in a heated tent. I generally use a thermarest, either a full length one or a 3/4 length one, and a bivy bag and a sleeping bag if I'm sleeping on the ground and I'm comfortable, and I've done that for years, and I have never got my sleeping bag wet sleeping on the ground unless I've been sleeping out just in a bivy bag that isn't a completely like a mini tent, like a double hoop bivy bag. So sometimes you want to sleep out under the stars. I remember one evening I slept out, sleeping mat inside the bivy bag, sleeping bag inside. It had pretty heavy rainstorms overnight, and even though I fastened things quite up, water is going to get in. What I find in those situations works best is if you don't have a bag that will zip over completely and have a little hoop in it, like some of them do. I don't tend to use those anymore. If I want a lightweight tent, I take a lightweight tent these days because lightweight tents are so much lighter. But if I am sleeping out in a bivy bag, only a bivy bag, no tarp over me, and it starts to rain, most bivy bags have got some sort of hood that will cowl up around your face. The best thing to do with those is not try and put them up over your face because water will just come in. The best thing to do is lie on your front with the hood over your head so it protects and it stops the rain coming in. That will work well. And people are going to ask about biting insects and things. Yeah, if you've got biting insects, you're not going to be sleeping out like that in the first place. If you know there's going to be midges or mosquitoes or black flies or anything else, you take a shelter that's appropriate. So hopefully that helps. Choose the right spot, macro sense within the woods, choose the right spot, micro in terms of localized low spots. Make sure you put your tarp up in a sensible spot. Make sure that your sleeping bag is inside a bivy bag and that bivy bag is waterproofed, and you will have no problem. As I say, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nights spent sleeping out like that. I really enjoy it. I like sleeping outside. I know some people prefer hammocks. That's fine. I don't personally. I quite like sleeping on a flat piece of ground. I find it better for my back. I find it's better for my kidneys. I find I sleep better that way. That works for me. I don't get wet. I don't get water coming in the side. I don't get water flowing underneath. It's just about intelligent choice of where you put the tarp in the first place. Okay, thanks for the question there, Jeff. Hopefully that helps. There's a lot of other stuff around that. It wasn't aimed at you, but there's been a lot of comments on YouTube. Hopefully that puts that to bed, pun intended. But do check out those other videos in terms of me being under a tarp in the rain, how to lighten the load if you are taking tarps and sleeping bags, as well as that setup of that really lightweight setup. And I'm using that quite a lot at the moment. I've been using that setup a lot this summer. Even I made that video at the beginning of last year, beginning of 2015. I've been using that lightweight tarp and lightweight bivy bag setup a lot more this summer, and I'm really enjoying how little space and weight it's taken up in my sleeping bag. All right, the battery is now dying. Oh, the joys of small cameras. Okay, I'm gonna swap that out. Okay, good. Next question is about saws. I think this will be quite a quick one. So this is from Plyler McManus. And his question is, lightweight saws. What lightweight saw do you recommend for carrying on a 2 to 3 day hike to be used to process firewood, and why? I have purchased 2 already and both tend to bind and drag rather badly once the blade sinks deeply into the wood. Presumably because they are inexpensive versions with no tooth set or blade taper. It seems that the consensus is the Barco Laplander, but I can't tell from the company's documentation whether this saw blade design is significantly different from what I already have, and prior to paying for a third saw experiment, I thought I would ask specifically, what saw do you recommend and what features of that saw minimises binding? Yeah, well, that's quite easy. I do recommend the Barco Laplander. I recommend it for a couple of reasons. One is that it is designed as a pruning saw, first off, and so it's designed for cutting relatively small diameter green wood in particular. That makes it designed for not binding while cutting those things. It's ergonomically well designed. If you're cutting branches off, it's ergonomically well designed for doing that. It locks open, which is a good safety feature on any folding bladed tool. It also locks closed, which I think is very useful because it means that it's never going to be open when you come to take it out your pocket, take it out your pack. It means it's safe. It also means that it's not going to open in your pack and damage other equipment. So I think that's a useful feature for it to have as well. In terms of the blade specifically, it rakes a cut that is wider than the diameter of the main body of the blade, and therefore it doesn't bind. Most pruning saws cut on the pull rather than the push. If you look at a Laplander, the teeth are arranged slightly backwards, just slightly, and it will cut on the pull. A lot of people find them inefficient until they realize that, because they're trying to cut on the push and they're not doing much on the pull on the way backwards. Actually, most of the cut is on the back. That's because there is no inherent external rigidity applied to the saw. There's no frame, there's no spine to it. It's just the material of the blade. And what that means is if it was cutting on the push, it would tend to kink and bend and bind. And I don't know which ones you've bought, but that could be another reason why they're binding. But if they're bending on the push and kinking in the cut, that's going to not help matters. So a saw that cuts on the pull, one that has the teeth arranged alternately wider than the diameter of the main body of the blade, means that it's going to rake out a cut that is bigger and it's not going to bind. And teeth that are the right sort of teeth for cutting all the types of wood that you're trying to cut. So you're talking about cutting firewood, but also these saws are designed to cut green wood as well, and green wood tends to bind more because it's wet, it has sap, it has resin, than the drier seasoned wood. So buy a good quality pruning saw. Barco Laplander is my top choice. The silky saws are also pretty good, but they tend to be more brittle in my experience. I've seen a few of them break when they've been bent slightly, whereas the Laplanders, the steel tends to be a lot more malleable and a lot more forgiving. You can bend the tip and straighten it out again with a Leatherman, for example, on an expedition, whereas I've seen the tips break off silkies, and that for me is a key difference that makes me want to carry a Laplander, particularly into wild country. Hopefully that helps. Next question, and I think it's the last question. This is the last question for episode 35. This is from David Guy. Hi David, nice to hear from you. Haven't heard from you for a while. David asks, I hope you're well and getting out. Yes, I certainly am. I'm really enjoying the articles and videos. My question is, what tools and equipment do you use to maintain your knife and axe at home? Many thanks, David. Okay, so In the field, I tend to just try and take minimal equipment. I tend to take at least a small pocket stone. Typically, I've taken a DC4, a Falkenhaven DC4 in my pocket. I've got one in my pocket now. It's one I've had for years, and that is something that I just, when I have a knife, I take that with me. And if I'm carrying an axe, I tend to carry an axe stone as well, one of the Gransfors axe stones, and that is what I use in the field. And I can of course use those at home. For those field questions, I did an article on those a while ago. I'll link to that in the show notes. If people are interested in options for carrying with you without carrying too much weight to maintain all your gear, that stuff that I talked about, and there are some other good suggestions in the comments on the article, I would recommend people go over there. I'll link it in the show notes. So yes, you can use those at home, and as a basis, if you wanted just to get something to look after everything all the time, that's all you really need. But if you want to give your gear a really nice sort of bench treatment at home and bring everything up to being really spick and span, there's a few other things that you might want. Now, generally I use my leather belt for stropping in the field, both my knife and my axe. You might want to make yourself some sort of paddle strop at home with it's basically a piece of board with a piece of leather glued onto it, and then you could use some stropping compound. You could just use some metal polish for that, but you can also buy specific stropping compounds for getting a really nice fine almost mirror finish on edges often, and that might be the only extra thing that you need, and I would certainly recommend getting one of those or making one of those yourself. In terms of getting posh with your sharpening at home for your knife, if you want to, you can get a set of waterstones, so some Japanese waterstones. Get some coarse grade ones for if you really need to take the knife back to its shape and need to get metal off quite quickly. I'd recommend at least an 800. You might want to go coarser than that still, but at least an 800, and then above that a 1200 and a 6000 will serve you well. So 800, 1200, 6000, and as a minimum I'd say get a 1200, 6000. You can get 1000, 6000 combination stones, and if you're on a budget, that's what I would get. So rather than get the 800 and the 1200 and the 6000 separately, just get the 1000, 6000 combo stone. Get a little rubber housing for it. You can get one that screws on, or you can get ones that they just sit in. That stops it slipping around on the bench, and that's what you need. If you want to go really posh, get yourself an 8000. You're also going to need a Nagura stone, which is something that helps create a slurry on top of the stone. For a 6000 and an 8000, I'd recommend that. That's going to cost you a reasonable amount of money. If you're in the UK, which you are, David, have a look at Axminster Tools, their website, Axminster Power Tools or Axminster Tools. If you search on that on Google or another search engine of your choice, you should find their website. Search on Waterstones in there and you can see what's available. So get the bench size stones, 800, 1200, 6000. If you want to go really posh, get an 8000. Make yourself a paddle strop and use those. In terms of what I would use on my axe at home, I don't really do anything else with my axe at home than what I do in the field. I use the axe stone. Gransfors axe stone works really, really well. But if you say started with the combination waterstone, what you can do down the line if you end up getting individual waterstones is you take your combination waterstone, saw that in half, and that makes a really good axe stone as well. There's one of those in that article that I talked about for things that you can take in the field with you as well, because that's another option for an axe stone in the field as well. Take a combination waterstone, saw it in half, and carry that with you, and you can sharpen your knives and your axe with that as well. So those would be my recommendations: good waterstones, paddle strop, stropping paste, and then make sure that you oil things afterwards so that they're protected, particularly if they're not stainless steel. So you can put camellia oil or similar light oils that are designed for the purpose on or traditionally used for the purpose on your knives. I just use some 3-in-1 or gun oil on my axes just to protect them. Again, there's an article on 3 basic things you need to do to keep your axe in good shape. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That wasn't that long ago on my blog, but I'll link to that just in case you haven't seen that. And that's everything that you need to know basically about looking after your stuff at home. And I think that brings us to the end. The other thing I would say is, with a water stone, as with an oil stone, you need to get the angle right. Most people are going to be using a Scandi grind knife, whether it's a Mora or a handmade knife. You're going to be using a Scandi grind, flat grind. Make sure you get the angle of your knife correct with respect to the stone, and I've got some resources that show you how to do that. I've got a video that shows you how to do that, and I've got a general bench stone sharpening article as well. It's using an oil stone, but the principle is exactly the same as with a water stone, so I will link to those on the show notes as well. So a bumper set of different resources linked in the show notes this time. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please go over there and check those out. I know it's an extra step. Go over to paulkirtley.co.uk, but then it just allows me to keep everything in one place, because this goes out as a podcast on different platforms, it goes out as a video on YouTube, it goes out as a video on my blog as well, and if I have to put those links in just one place, that's a lot easier for me, because I don't have unlimited time to do this. So thank you for your attention. The other thing I would ask you to do is, if you enjoy these shows, then please could you share a link to the video or the page on my blog or a page on iTunes or somewhere where people can pick up and subscribe to this. So go to your favorite group on Facebook or Google Plus or wherever you hang out with other people, and if you would just share this, that will help me out no end, because other people that are like-minded are going to see these shows and they're going to benefit from them as well. They're going to be able to subscribe to them. That helps me because I get more questions. That then helps you because you get a wider range of questions answered. So that's all good for me. It's all good for you. I appreciate your help. I appreciate your attention, and I will look forward to answering more questions in episode 36 of Ask Paul Kirtley before too long. Take care.